which is called judging in a different country. Uh, there are a few things that you might relate to, but for the most part, we're going to be talking about my experience judging at what for the first time. So let's get started. So before we start, I'll talk a little bit about myself. Uh, I've played Magic since 2016. I've been during the Oval Field launch time, but I took a long break until like 2019 when I joined off L3 Tournaments. A friend got me back into Magic by giving me a commander deck built entirely by himself. And it was from that point onwards that I got back into the game. I wanted to know more about the rules as the more I played, and also I've seen some of my fellow judges posting about their foils. I wanted those for my EDH deck. So I actually managed to get to my L1 during early 2022. With some encouragement and myself treating it as a journey for self-growth, I've successfully gotten my L2 this year, notably 2 months ago during June 2023. My favorite formats for Magic are in this specific order. I enjoy Legacy, followed by Pre-Modern, Modern, and last but not least is Commander. However, this doesn't mean that I don't pay attention to the other formats. I do keep track of what's going on Pioneer and Standard. The deck that I seemingly love to bring out the most for EDH games is definitely Eureka. I love flipping big mouth spells and taking out table at once. If you like to see my deck list, feel free to drop me a message on Facebook. I'm more than happy to share my deck list. So outside of Magic, I'm also actively involved in the esports ecosystem for Dota 2. I work as an operations manager for an esports platform, overseeing their day-to-day activities and as well as their partner programs. So let's talk about the event itself. As you can see, that's me right over there, followed by Yuin and of course QJ. So the event itself is the Cycle 2 SEA Championship Weekend that was held at SMS Luncheon Club. I was selected to work all three days as a floor judge during the LCQs, the finals, and of course the Philippines Open. And all of this started off entirely as a random 2 a.m. thought. When I saw the location announced on Facebook, I was like, this is a very good time to see my friends. So let's try and apply and see what happens from there onwards. And I woke up to this. I was very happy. However, once my application was confirmed, 2 thoughts came to my mind. I was very nervous. It's basically my first time judging in a very, very different environment. Definitely not what I'm used to back at home. And I'm also excited because this means I finally get to enjoy lots of good food, meet a bunch of online friends, as well as connect more with the Filipino judge community. I think during that time, I really wanted to try Halo, and I'm still craving Halo, not gonna lie. So before we start, this is more of a travel tip. I've never really traveled outside Malaysia up until this point, but don't assume your ticket comes with checked baggage. I made the very, very costly mistake of not looking at the fine print, and as a result, I have to pay an additional 600 ringgit or around 135 US dollars for my own mistake. Oopsie. All right, so I think it's also important that with the day and age of the smartphone, you should have a couple of digital resources at hand so you can accurately and in a timely manner deliver all your rulings to the people who call for you to judge. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about, I feel like this is the best way, the best app I feel when it comes to judging is definitely Raffle. Raffle is a MTG companion app. I'll show you guys a few more screenshots later, but it contains the following, which is the IPG, the MTR, comprehensive rulings just for about every single mechanic out there. And my favorite feature is definitely the decklist counter. And this is also created and well maintained by our a fellow level 3, which is Ling Xiang. So, quick glance over here, you can see that the drop-down menu has multiple places that you can get your resources from. And with me being really bad at counting, the deck list counter also will definitely make your counting much more accurate. I also like to mention that this also works both on Apple and Android, so definitely you can also check it out on the Apple Store after this conference. So the next thing that I also have bookmarked is my Raffle. I generally prefer it way more than the Gatherer website. It does basically what the Gatherer is supposed to do, but way better, and the information is usually the presentation is way more cleaner, and I would definitely prefer showing this to someone else rather than Oracle text for Buckle. I'm not really sure, but I would definitely use Stripe over this, if I'm being honest. And last but not least, of course, is the trusty pen and notebook. Some may say it's not very necessary, but I do feel that I find it very, very useful for jotting down time extensions, penalties, and most importantly, if you are a new judge, you can use this to jot down what you have learned during the day itself. Alright, so I'd like to talk briefly about my judging experience up until now. All the events that I've worked at are usually up until this point small or medium-sized. So without a doubt, I'm definitely going to be seeing quite a bit of regulars at each competitive REL event, and as a result, I'm a bit more laid back when approaching the regular event grinders. They are familiar faces who know how to act properly. I'm very grateful for as a result, because they know how to present themselves as polite human beings, but and up until this point, I had no issue with delivering any of my rulings. I have yet to see an appeal. However, this will all change because getting thrown into this environment means someone actually disagreed with me for the first time. So here's a little bit on how I got my first ever appeal. Right. So the situation was a little something like this. I was looking at 2 tables at once in my station area. In hindsight, this was definitely not the ideal scenario because I was not paying full attention to both games, but rather was glancing at both of them, just making sure that my presence was felt. I'll go through more on this later, but I overheard a conversation happening on the other table regarding a lethal attack, and the opponent wasn't really declaring the blockers properly. So, and the non-active player and a spectator got my attention, and then I just headed over immediately. So here's the scenario. NEP didn't know he was facing lethal damage from a combat trick. I think he probably missed it out of sheer nervousness, but when the opponent revealed that there was an additional effect that he could have done, he wanted to backtrack. And during this entire ordeal, he was being very, very aggressive, but not to the point where he was rude. more on that later. He kept telling me, "You heard our conversation, right? I actually wanted to block like this, so I actually knew about him activating this ability, which would prevent me from taking lethal damage." Though I just want to give a heads up, the specifics for this event weren't really that clear anymore. It's been close to 4 months-ish, but this is the best of my ability to reconstruct the scenario at hand. Now, the active player, on the other hand, humbly decided to repeat his side of the story, and from his standpoint, it does seem more believable. And he was like, "I did this. I'm going to go to attack, and before damage, I used an ability, and apparently my opponent wants to take back his game action and redeclare blocks after he found out that he missed on something." Then, so it was during this time I wasn't really too sure how to proceed because I was handling both tables at once. So I called another judge from a nearby station and asked for his second opinion. And after some back and forth, we decided that the active player had a more believable side of the story, because it felt to me like he wanted to prevent himself from losing because of his own mistake. And we ruled that everything was in his favor, and I delivered it as it is. So at the end of the ruling, like I usually do, I say the sentence: "If you do not like this ruling, you're more than welcome to appeal to the head judge." And to my surprise, this was my first time getting an appeal. And I was like, "Okay, shit, what do I do now? This has never happened before to me. How am I going to deal with it?" So right off the bat, I decided to call in the head judge at that time, which I believe was Gerard. He was a couple of tables away during the time, but I remember specifically saying, "Hey, hey Gerard, there's an appeal at table X. The story is someone trying to take back their blocks, and they want it to be ruled in their favor. It's regarding a combat trick. Please take a look." And the other judge that was with me explained the situation to him, but after briefly talking, giving him the gist of it, because I had to attend to other tables at the time. So, and eventually everything ended with the player accepting Gerard's ruling, which was the same as what I delivered. So here's a quick 2-minute discussion. Was there anything that maybe you would have done differently? You feel free to write down your responses in the chat box. I'll go through them one by one, see if there's anything that I personally felt interesting.
Okay, for those who would like to mic up, you can raise your hand or feel free to use our chat box and let us know if there's anything that you would have done differently given the scenario that Brighton has shared. Or let us know if you would have done the same thing. Please feel free to type it in the chat box.
Mm.
Okay. Ken said, getting an appeal is somewhat rare, but it's totally okay. It doesn't mean the judge didn't manage the situation badly. Sometimes a player will appeal regardless of whatever happens.
I see.
Okay.
Question rather than a statement: would it be fair for the appealing player, given that the appeal was against them? That's a very interesting. As the attending judge would have been, yes, I do agree. I would definitely keep that in mind, because praising to the head judge seems to be biased against them. Yes and no, because this was actually done in private. This was me calling Gerard at the same time while giving him the gist of it. But it has been quite a while, so I'm doing my best to actually reconstruct this from my memory. And QJ says, I would like to suggest White saying, if you don't like the ruling, that is true. Maybe I would have phrased it better in my future calls. And I also like to address the sorry if I mispronounce your name, Khan. So getting an appeal is somewhat rare, but totally okay. It doesn't mean the judge managed the situation badly. I actually am also going to cover that later in the things that I learned. But it's okay. I definitely feel that way as well. Yuan, thanks a lot for the feedback. Yes, it does seem that the more experienced judges are actually stepping in and giving their thoughts. Really appreciate you guys. But I think the 2 minutes mark is up. Let's. I'm gonna go and jump to the things that I learned, if that's okay. So, so here's a few things that I personally learned from this encounter itself. This is more towards the end of time, where time is approaching and you need to be around just to collect the slips. So unless you're physically present and 100% focused on the game where the judge call took place, do never jump to conclusions. And one thing that I've learned to do from now on is when approaching time, you'll find a table and sit down right next to it. I wasn't really sure to trust my own hearing. One, because the event was loud, and two, I was looking at both games at once. It may avoid you missing out on any details that pop up. So players also do tend to misplay under pressure with the time approaching. So definitely sit down and have your presence at one single table to ensure that the game stays under control and being played properly. The other one is definitely ask for specific verbiage. In this case, you want to know exactly what has been said by both parties, just so you can reconstruct your story much more accurately. And you may need to repeat your questions just to make sure that the story does not change. And definitely, without a doubt, separate the players and have them tell their side of the story again, just to avoid any form of influence. And by doing this, you can actually ask a few questions that maybe you have not asked before. So, for example, what's your plan next turn? What do you plan to do with the cards in your hands? And something that we can do is, how long did your opponent take before moving phases? So time is also an important factor when you consider decision making. If it's very short, maybe it's hard for the non-active player to interrupt at the end of main phase or before the combat phase. But if it was long, maybe we might need to do a little bit of investigation. Something might be up. And backing up here would be extremely risky. So ideally, you want to reconstruct the story so that has happened, so both players can, in the perfect world, agree on how the situation has been presented. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case most of the time, because they are very likely to have two different versions of what they would like to present. So your job as the judge for the event is to definitely come up with a decision to let the game proceed. And it will inevitably favor one party over the other. I think that is what NG said. Have you, considering the fact that some people, especially the party that's being appealed against, it may not feel good for them. So do be sure that you are very you definitely want to confirm, and most importantly, stress that your decision is based on both player sides of the story with no form of bias, and players are definitely welcome to appeal after you have delivered your ruling. And this is entirely optional. If you need more information, do involve up to 2 to 3 bystanders as necessary. This is mostly if you need to a form of evidence on a certain form of verbiage, how things are being communicated, how the opponent move phases, tap their lands. You basically want like some sort of alibi, and they need to be visibly spectating to confirm that the scenario mentioned actually happened. And before we end, I also like to bring up appeals. Very common. It does not mean that the players do not believe you. It is usually within their right. It is within their right, obviously, to consult for a second opinion of a higher authority. And most of the time is they want to try to have the head judge give them a ruling in their favor. So from as we've seen, this rarely happens unless the floor judge is doing this is in a sense being very biased or accidentally delivered the wrong ruling. All right. Now let's go to the second slide, which is dealing with verbally aggressive players. Prior to this, I've never really dealt with people that are, I would say, impolite because they know me, players, and then we're pretty much familiar with each other. So there's no reason to be hostile. It kind of just ruins the mood for everyone. So during this was actually my first encounter with someone that is borderline aggressive. So let's talk about the situation itself. I came across a cable that was in the middle of a conflict. So this was a case of shortcutting not being communicated properly, and you so the active player decides to tap the creatures and says, "I'm gonna go to attacks," and then this thing will trigger, and then the non-active player says, "Hold on, there's something that I want to do before you go to attacks." The active player was like, "No, totally didn't hear you say that." Anyway, trigger on the stack. And from the gist of it, you figure out that this was a case of both players not being on the same page. Most likely, it wasn't really communicated properly, or the player wasn't given a chance to respond, though it does seem that the latter is more likely to happen. So active player was also being very, very rude and about it. I've already told you about the situation. Please can't you do something about it? You're being very, very unprofessional when it comes to delivering this ruling. So what would you have done right here? If you like to give your opinion, the chat box is open right now, or you can ask the moderators to have you unmuted.
Can you explain again why they said it's unprofessional? I'm a bit lost about this part.
I remember him saying it was very unprofessional because it was because of his attitude. I think I just finished collecting a few slips, And then I just got called over to that table, so I was like a bit flustered, I guess. So and then like me repeating the scenario twice, just to confirm that this happened, he said that was being very unprofessional.
So the first thing that I would do when they are criticizing the professional stuff, especially in this situation, I would tell them that I am asking a second time for them. So I'm basically explaining to the angry person that I am a friendly person, and the only thing that I want is help them, and this is important for them as well as it is important for me. So I'm trying to show them that I'm on their side, and that's how I would make them. I would try to diffuse it. Yeah. So that's the first thing that I would do is try to tell him, hey, I understand it's stressful. I'm asking a second time because I think this is important for you, and I don't want to mess this up.
I do agree with that. And Z also made a very good point. Show that you're there to help, not to take sides. Definitely, it does reassure that you're not being biased in any way, and you're communicating your job as a mediator, clear and transparent to both sides, especially the one that's being very aggressive right now. Let's see. I just met aggressive and verbal behaviors in casual engaged tournaments, so I chose to let the small owner deal with him because the player blames me. He asked me, oh, wow. Man. Well, that does happen. But yes, I will move on to the resolution part. I'll ask the player how many ballot or servings of Sisig. Jeez. Okay, I will go to resolution. So I believe Loco was my team lead of the day itself, and he stepped in. He was visibly much more firmer than when I was delivering my previous ruling. So, as mentioned from the previous few slides, Local split both players to gather the story separately from both of their ends, namely how the act of moving to combat was actually communicated. So the player eventually gave in to the given ruling without an appeal, thankfully, because of a few things that I personally noted down, which I'll talk about later. And finally, both players rolled back to before combat was declared, and the game continued to their happy ending. All right, so here's the things that I learned. Definitely, once again, being very important, ask both parties for these specific privileges. Can you confirm that he said the following, etc., etc. That way, you're definitely be able to reconstruct the story for both parties. And something that I feel that I need to work on is definitely to avoid using any words in your sentence that may cause any form of doubt when you deliver your ruling. So I think the ruling is like this. Maybe you might want to give it some thought. These things, if you say that to either side, they feel like you will not be qualified. It doesn't really matter if it's your first big event, or they wouldn't have much form of empathy. And by using these words, they may give them room to escalate a small judgment into a bigger issue. And most of the time, this is where appeals actually start to be escalated. And in this case, you want to avoid this. These sentences in particular.
I think the judge that's giving my ruling is not sure what he's doing. Can I appeal to the head judge, please? So what you should do instead, you need to be firm and assertive. That's honestly something I'm still working on at the moment. And if you need a point of reference, you should, especially if it concerns a card mechanic or something that is easily searchable through the MTR, you would actually quote a sentence from there. So according to this CR in particular, based on card types are yada yada yada. And most importantly, when explaining a complex interaction, speak slower. So the other parties can absorb the information better. This is more true, especially if you're in a larger audience. And do remember, you are a judge. You are a person with authority, and you should definitely enforce that whenever you deliver your ruling. QJ also did point out something very valid. I am certain of my ruling, but I know this game is important for you, so I like to consult my colleague to ensure that we can deliver the most accurate ruling for you. That is correct. So, yep, I'm going to go to the second last slide right here, which is to take it easy. So as mentioned, my judging experiences up until now were mostly limited to small size events. I'm usually the only person in the room to fix things as a result, and I've been working by myself with usually sometimes limited help. Compared to this time around where I was in SMF Cup, the event space was definitely much wider with more room to move about. First thing right here is don't interrupt your peers. I know this was my first event, and in hindsight, I definitely should have known better. I rushed to give the ruling, even though there was a judge that was visibly attending to that table. That's actually considered rather rude, and you're being very disrespectful. And they would think that you're being overly arrogant by taking the call from them. So right after that, I got pulled aside, and one of the judges, he was like, "Hey, that's not cool. Don't try to snatch any other people's judge calls. You're demeaning them by taking away their opportunity to present. It's the same reason why when you're in a restaurant, you would see two waiters or waitresses rushing for your order. So instead, what you should do is stand around. If there are no other places that need your attention, let them deliver their ruling and only speak up if they ask you for your help. So if they need to consult, they will ask you. Maybe, and then if there's something that you want to ask them, you do it after the judge call has been resolved. And another thing, the exception here is only to actually intervene if you firmly believe that the person is wrong. However, I would personally do it more discreetly, but this is by far the most obvious example that I can think of. If someone quotes a creature dying with rest in peace will have its death trigger go on the stack. That's what you say, no, sorry, actually, this isn't supposed to be like that. And so let's talk about how they could...
Sorry to interrupt,
yes,
but
no problem.
From the slide you just did, QJ put it an add-on that I think...
Yes, sorry,
don't react to all the comments, but I think this one should definitely be said.
Yes.
To do it on the side and tell them, hey, can we talk on the side, and then tell them outside. It's probably friendlier for them.
Mm-hmm. QJ did bring up a very valid point. As an add-on, if you think the ruling is wrong, pull them aside to talk in private instead of asking over the table in earshot. Yes, I do agree. If you feel that something is wrong, handle it privately, outside of the player's POV. It definitely makes you. It would reduce any form of unintended conflict. That is for sure. All right. I'll continue from right here. So here's the thing. What if you think they could have done better? So what you would do is you approach them after the judge call has been resolved. Maybe ask them for their thought process. And if you think that it's not something that you entirely agree with, then you state your opinion, and then something along the lines of maybe you should have done this first, or have you considered doing Y instead? That way, you won't come off as condescending, and it implies that you also are interested in learning more. Or if you are correct, you give yourself the opportunity to teach and mentor the player, the judge itself. So before, I also like to stress, before delivering a ruling, read the card twice. It is very easy to misinterpret something because you glanced over a line of text really quickly, and match it with the scenario presented to you, just so that, and speaking this out loud also gives player a sense of affirmation that you are presenting the story accurately to them. And of course, have the oracle text ready on hand, especially for poker cards. I've seen cases where people use the vision impulse. They check the top four, add one to hand, put the rest at the bottom, and still shuffle the deck. Do actually, like I mentioned, have Strifle ready at all times, especially when you're dealing with older cards. So here is a scenario that I personally remember very clearly. I think QJ was also involved in this as well. So let's talk about it. So player A controls a Fable of the Mirror Breaker from player B, which is obtained by Siphon Insight. So when the chapter 3 of Fable of the Mirror Breaker transforms into Reflection of Hidriki, whose control does it enter under? Feel free to leave your answers in the chat box. Meanwhile, I'll also look at the previous comments. If you're not sure about some game ruling, pause the game and look at the clock. Then do as QJ suggests. Definitely agree. You have the power to issue time extensions, and I think if you're not sure, it's definitely best to delay the game a little bit rather than give the wrong ruling and potentially ruin the game. Also, before delivering the ruling, ask the players if the situation as is, meaning everything is done for the game action, is just waiting a ruling instead. That is true. Yep. Cool. So let's just move to the next slide. The answer is it returns to the battlefield under player A's control. Notice the text that says, then return it to the battlefield transform under your control. This is now, if you read this very, very fast, and I give you like 5 seconds, it is possible that you may misread a few things, and then as a result say, oh, actually it returns to your opponent. So that's what I almost ruled, and QJ managed to intervene before I delivered the wrong ruling. So because player A controls the trigger ability of Fable of the Mirror Breaker, it will return to the battlefield under his control. So, as mentioned, don't be hasty, and of course, this would have been prevented if I spent a little bit more time reading the card itself. Sorry. So before we go to the last slide, let me just go and talk about Khan's comments about talking and giving feedback to the judge. The method described was the generic one and it's perfect. In the case where you think it's a screw up, please don't go around the pot. They usually know something is bad. Don't extend torture of having a talk about it. And definitely, I feel that have this done nicely and gently. This could have been better. Let's talk about it. But ultimately, I feel that these form of interactions will improve as you judge more and you interact more with your peers. But that's it's still a very good advice, and thank you so much for sharing that. Oh God, I hate the old judge culture of how was your day when you started to read when you screwed up. Jeez, I wasn't really judging around that time. I couldn't imagine that. So last but not least, so let's take it easy. I don't think this was my personal experience when with all the events leading up to the Friday, Saturday, Sunday event. So before this, we had a Thursday entirely dedicated to an offline conference. So everyone got to know each other better. And I also like to talk about that. There are some quick refreshers on the judging aspects, that from soft skills to meta knowledge to maybe learning a few new things as well. What was discussed on the day itself was the March 2023 Standard Meta by Ian and Phil. What interactions do we commonly expect? And we also went through a few soft skills from KJ and Alex on handling feedback and the importance of teamwork. And Gerard was there to give his speech on the importance of side events. And Ruben was giving a talk on the philosophy of LEC and HCP. So here's a few photos on the stuff we covered. I think the first image was the one where QJ was talking about handling feedback. The other one is talking about what to expect for the March 2023 meta, what interactions to normally expect, and of course for the deck checking team, what cards to usually expect in the deck list. Of course, for lunch, we definitely, this was my first time trying Catalan. It was absolutely amazing. Definitely love the all-you-can-eat stuff right here. I took quite a bit of seasick, and I'm actually still craving for this, if I'm being honest. And right after that, let's talk about the LEC and HCE flow chart. I think this is something that all judges should definitely take their time to screenshot and look at it. I personally still consult this flow chart from time to time. I wouldn't really go over the specifics, but if you like to know more, and you can just leave a message for Ruben, because that's his slides. If you want nice Filipino food, you get all this nice business. All right, let's go to Q&A session. So I'll try my best to scroll up and see if there's anything that I missed out. How if, for example, I delivered a wrong ruling, the player appealed, and then the case judge delivered the same ruling as mine. But later, like a round or two later, both head judge and me realized that we both delivered the wrong ruling. I wouldn't say people are. So it's very rare to happen, especially since your head judge is more or less slightly a higher level than you. They would have more experience. But in the rare occasion that both of you are wrong, it does happen. We are still human after all. You're, like Philip said, you're gonna have to do a lot of apologizing. There is nothing much you can do, especially if the ruling was given not in their favor. Are there any other questions? Oh, yeah, it'll be more common than we think. Yes, the Blood Moon Dryad is, geez. Sometimes I do freeze at layers. It does happen. Though, in this case, a fun fact that if you're in the Judge Academy Discord, there is an SOS section just to consult on something or an interaction that you are definitely not sure of. So do keep that in mind if you are judging a live event and you freeze on certain things like these.
Brighton, let me read some of the comments from our participants as well.
No problem.
Keith said, if you do not sure, or if you're unsure about some ruling, pause the game and look at the clock. Then do as QJ suggests, do a private investigation and ask for opinions from other experienced judges. Phil said, also before delivering a ruling, ask the players if the situation is as is, meaning everything done for the game action is just awaiting a ruling instead of them fishing for a ruling to make them change their decisions. I think that's a good tip. Sean Wang from Malaysia said, I'm sorry, I think they were responding to the question earlier. Khan from France said about talking and giving feedback to your fellow judge. The method described was the generic one and it's perfect in the case where you think it's a screw up. So, number one, please don't go around the pot. Like, how did you do? What do you think? And they usually know something was bad and don't extend the torture of having them talk about it. And lastly, just go gently and nicely, like a breakup. I think this could have been done better. Let's talk about it. I would have done this and that. Okay, then see if you can dive in what happened. When you did why, it created ZZZ. I think also this is a good starting point when you're providing feedback to your fellow judges.
Yes.
What else?
That is true because I definitely did not consider the fact whether or not if the ruling resolution ended on a positive or negative note. I was actually more towards how you should deliver your feedback as general as possible. There are a few factors that need to be considered, like is my fellow judge feeling absolutely terrible? You definitely do not want to open with, "Oh, how was your day?" That's like rubbing salt in the wound.
Tatag from Indonesia has a good question here. How if, for example, I delivered a wrong ruling and the player appealed, and then the head judge delivered the same ruling as mine, but later, like a round or two later, both the head judge and me realized that we delivered the wrong ruling.
Oh, I actually think I addressed this already.
Oh, okay.
No worries. The way that we settled on this was we both of us are still human, even though this is very, very not likely to happen. The head judge is most likely an L2 or L3 that has more experience than the L1 that's reporting to them. But mistakes do happen, and if that happens, you will have a lot of apologizing to do.
Correct.
Like what Philip just mentioned. yes.
Sean said one of
go
the
ahead.
fears when it comes to going to an overseas event is, will people have prejudice against your ruling because you're not a local? How would you go about reducing this anxiety?
Mm,
Did you encounter anything similar, Brighton, when you were here in the Philippines?
I no, actually. This doesn't. I personally have not encountered this, but
Mhm.
if I were Sean, if I were you, I would personally address the ruling as is, and if they are not convinced, or if they want it delivered in Tagalog, for example, I'll just get someone that is fluent in that language and have them deliver the ruling in Tagalog. Hopefully that answers your questions.
QJ also chimed in. He said, for some players, it doesn't matter who you are. If you're not a person they trust, they won't trust you anyway, regardless if you're from the same country or not even. Give the best ruling possible, get people to shadow you to get feedback and suggestions, and build your confidence from there. It will come as you do more and more rulings that you're happy with. Yeah. I think
Yes.
it's really about gaining experience and learning from your mistakes, right? I mean, to err is human, as how the saying goes. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. This thing usually comes from experience. QJ also didn't build up his reputation in one day. I think the reason why we all know and respect him as of today is because of the sheer amount of events that he has been experienced through. And that's something that you should definitely keep in mind as you progress through your judge journey.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions for Brighton? Here, we have one question from Mark. How would you handle a player's accusation that your ruling was unfavorable? Sorry, that your ruling was unfavorable. Oops.
Yeah, the
To
chat
them
did
because
go
the
a little
other
bit.
player is your countryman. So there, how would you handle a player's accusation that your ruling was unfavorable to them because the other player is from the same country as you?
So I think this. Okay, I think this did. I gave a ruling to a Malaysian fighting a Filipino, but this did not happen,
Mhm.
thankfully. However, how would you handle a player's accusation? I, in this case, I would stress that I do not take any sides. I am completely being unbiased when delivering the ruling as I evaluate both players' side of the story. It doesn't matter if the person traveled all the way from the same country as I did to play in this event. I'm still delivering the ruling as is. And if they're still not happy, or if, in my opinion, if they're being very aggressive about it, uh, the first instinct that I'll probably do is have a Filipino judge come in and take over the call.
Okay. All right.
And just very, very quick, sorry to, I hope I don't hijack too much.
Yes.
About
Yes.
the accusation on the countryman,
Yes.
I wouldn't even answer that. I would dodge it and deflect on the ruling itself. Usually, when you give your ruling, you say your decision. Depending on your time, you explain why you did it. If they attack you with this, I double down on why I did it. So if it's a backup, usually when we back up, it's because there is not much information issue and the cards in the hand are not destroyed from the backup because there is a shuffle involved, right? So when I explain to the players, I tell them very quickly, the two pivots of the backups are information and your cards in hands. And then I compare it to the other situation and I say, the other situation is we leave it as it is, and I prefer that you play with the information instead of the card that is not dead, and so on. So I would focus as much as I can on this and tell them that this ruling happened because of these reasons and stay there. If we do this correctly, in my opinion, there should not be any issue because if they escalate and still keep on the country side, then they enter into dangerous, let's say, unsporting minor territory. So don't even address it. Say I'm here. I'm neutral, and the factual reasons are these. If you're not happy, you can appeal. If you're not happy because I'm from this country, we can have another question.
Yeah, definitely. The best way to avoid any conflict is just to avoid it entirely. That is true.
All right.
Also, one more question, or a statement rather. Kenji, I'd like to hear more about being judged in a foreign country, because aside there don't seem to be issues judging in a foreign country. So regarding this presentation, this was actually more towards my first time dealing with a larger event, especially when there were a few uncertainties involved as well. Maybe it was maybe it didn't came off as intended, but I do feel that if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask after this, feel free to PM me.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, Brighton. I hope our participants actually learned a thing or two on their next big event. Maybe it's from their home country, or if ever they judge at a big tournament abroad here in a foreign country.
This was my first major event that wasn't in Malaysia, so definitely the way that I shaped this presentation was more towards that. So apologies if I didn't cover anything that is specific towards any form of xenophobia. But I feel like if you want to ask more about what I experienced during this trip, my DMs are always open.
Okay. All right. Thank you again, everyone. We'll